Emily Thornberry, hello.
Hi.
How's it going?
All right, thank you. Yeah, I'm all right.
Good. News yesterday from the Foreign Secretary taking the Prime Minister's place at the Downing Street lectern that the government is releasing £75 million of funds to get Britons trapped abroad home. Um, this is good news, isn't it? This is the government taking action to get our compatriots home.
Yeah, and yet it was sort of disappointing because, I mean, some of us have been working really hard at trying to get the Foreign Office kind of to get going, because time is of the essence. And I had a meeting with the Foreign Office last week, and I was saying to them, look, I've had more than 1,000 people contact me. I mean, now I don't know how many people have contacted me, probably about 1,300. And all my MPs are contacting me with their cases where, constituents are getting in touch with them. And I've been passing it on in tranches to the Foreign Office and trying to make suggestions and trying to be helpful and trying to kind of get them going and chivvying them along. And Dominic Raab has always been talking about keeping the airports open, working with the private companies, the aircraft carriers, the private aircraft companies, and maybe chartering if he needs to, right? And that kind of was what he was saying last night. It was as if he hadn't got any further. So, all the people who've contacted me, like the elderly people in Pakistan, who are running out of medication, I now can't email them and say, yes, it's okay. There's going to be, a flight for you. Or the backpackers in Australia who went on a work visa, whose work have dried up, who've been trying to get home, who bought a ticket. Blinken Airline has gone and cancelled the flight and given them a voucher, for a flight in a couple of months' time. What are they supposed to live on in the meantime? Or the people who've, their insurance has run out. Let's say they do have an underlying medical condition. They can't really afford insurance apart from a limited period, which is up to the end of the holiday. Now that they are having to remain in the country, their insurance has run out. How do they do it? Or the family of six from Yorkshire who actually went to Australia as a holiday because of the floods, and now they're being told by the private company, "Oh yeah, we can get you home, but it's going to cost you £61,000 to get the family of six home." I mean, people are taking the mickey. These private companies cancel. They say they're going to put on new flights. They don't speak to the passengers. They don't seem to me to be fulfilling their proper duties. It's really difficult, and they keep offering vouchers. I mean, I have another couple who bought one ticket. It got cancelled. They were given a voucher. They then bought another one, and then that flight was cancelled. I mean, these people are going to end up being destitute. And so it is really important that the Foreign Office acts quickly. So to hear Dominic Raab yesterday kind of saying more of the same, is really disappointing. And when you compare what Britain's doing or not doing with, Germany or Israel or France or the Netherlands, they've all managed to get their act together. Why are we still kind of putting plans together? And frankly, also, I don't want to be melodramatic about this, but actually, they haven't even spoken to the MOD. There are aircraft that can be used. Camforce One is part of, that big aircraft that they have, which carries passengers. Actually, there's quite a lot of those, and they're sitting in Brize Norton and not really being used. So if you've got people like up country, away from a major airport, and the reason that they can't get onto a plane is because they can't travel, we could be using the RAF to get people at least to the hub airports. Somewhere like Pakistan, where the military are obviously highly influential. The British military have close relationships with the Pakistani military. We could be working with them. We could be using military, but the conversation doesn't even seem to have happened. So, and they have experience when it comes to coordinating aircraft, and all that sort of things. Why not bring in that kind of expertise? I mean, I have told Dominic Raab about a number of examples of private companies taking the mickey, taking advantage of desperate people. I'm surprised that he continues to have such faith and confidence that the private sector is going to be able to solve this. And if he is going to commission some aircraft to actually go and pick people up, could he at least tell us which countries they're going to be and how it is that people can go about getting a place on it? So I'm sorry to whinge. I don't mean to, but we have been kind of here for a number of weeks now. 2 weeks ago, Dominic Raab said that the public should no longer travel abroad. And then a week ago, he said that everyone should come back. But 2 weeks ago, I raised the issue of Peru and quoted a whole lot of things from people who were stuck in Peru and how, frankly, hopeless at that point the British Embassy was being in Peru. I'm really pleased that Dominic Raab and the Foreign Office responded to that, and they have been putting on special aircraft to get people back from Peru. But what about all these other countries? The pinch points are, as far as I can see from my experience, and when I spoke to the Foreign Office, they agreed that it's the same countries. It's Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, New Zealand, and Australia. Put on some flights to there. Like, just begin with that. I appreciate that there may be somebody stuck in Burkina Faso, but unfortunately, it may be quite difficult to get an individual out. But there are large numbers of people in these major countries who can't get home at the moment, and we really should be doing our duty to get them back.
Yeah, I wanted to mention India to you, obviously, because there are regions of that country that are on, well, the entire country internally is on total lockdown. So even if there are flights operating from hub airports, Britons can't get to the airports. There are no taxis. There's no bus service for them to get there. And surely there's a role for the air. I'm going to have to, Emily, I'm sorry, my dog is growling at me. I just need to kick him into a different room. I will come back and I'll ask you that question again, okay?
Go on. What's the name of the dog?
Okay, there we go. Nelson's away.
I've done meetings where I've been heckled before, but never by a dog.
Doesn't like what you're saying, obviously. No, so I wanted to mention India to you, Emily, because obviously the entire country's locked down. So even if there are flights operating from those hub airports, Britons in Goa, other parts of the country, they cannot get there. There are no taxis, there are no buses. And I was going to say to you, is that not something for the RAF to be looking at, for us to be deploying? And the answer to that for you is yes.
Exactly. And also what worries me is that there is beginning to be a tension between the people of those countries and the visitors. So I was told that in Bangladesh, for example, there are signs up in the shops saying that foreigners are not to shop. That worries you. And I know that in Goa there is a tension which is developing between foreigners and the people of Goa, because there's this thing about, have you brought the virus with you? Do we want to have anything to do with you? So, I mean, it's in everyone's interest that those that want to leave should be able to leave. And I'm sure that the Indian government would want that as much as anyone else. But what they would want is some confidence that when these foreigners are travelling, that we're paying for it, we're organising it, it's no skin off their nose, we're not letting, we're doing it in an organised way, it's not chaotic, everyone knows what's going on. That's what happened in a slightly chaotic way, but, hey, it's hard, in Peru. We can do the same, I think, in these other countries, but we have to get on with it.
With with the current situation, obviously, is incredibly serious, and we have an obligation as a state to get these people home. But I wonder, is there an element here? I'm going to call it common sense that these people decided to travel abroad during a pandemic, and perhaps should not be that surprised when they end up trapped in these countries.
Well, that might apply to some people, but it takes me back to what was the Foreign Office advice. The Foreign Office advice was, as of last week, people should come home. As of 2 weeks ago, they should not travel abroad. So actually, that helps to kind of work out what the timetable of this is. And you were talking about Goa. I know of a couple where they were out in February, and he was involved in an accident, and he had to have an operation, and he's really ill. And so he needs to get back on an air ambulance, and they'd organised the air ambulance, and she went back the day before on a commercial flight. The air ambulance was supposed to be coming in the next day. No, air ambulance gets cancelled. So he's now stuck in Goa, really ill, and she's here in Britain. I mean, these are the sorts of cases that one hears about. And that's why I'm so frustrated when I hear a bit of blah, blah, blah from Dominic Raab. It's that, it all sounds good. We're going to help people. We're working night and day. Great. What are you doing? Just tell us, what are you doing? Tell us some plans. You have had long enough now.
That follows on nicely, because I wanted to ask you whether you thought the government has been quick enough to respond to this. You mentioned this timeline here of 2 weeks ago that the travel advice changed. Obviously, we had data coming out of China that there was a serious pandemic, that people were dying, and that it had the potential to be global at the end of January.
Yeah.
And I wondered if you think the government has been quick enough in its response.
I get the impression that the government has kind of changed horses, that they started off with this idea of herd immunity. There's not much that we can do. It's a pandemic. We can't really control it. But in any event, once a certain proportion of the population has caught it and got over it, then it'll pass. And I think there was a little bit of that. And even if it wasn't official government policy, it would sort of explain why they took so long to get going, why they didn't order the testing. I can't understand that there can be any other explanation for not ordering more tests. I mean, we invented the tests. Why in Britain, given that we invented them, we seem to be the last people to be able to get them? Why don't we have enough personal protection equipment? Why have we not ordered enough of that? I suspect it's because we were on a horse that was, well, yes, we know this is coming, but let's not over egg the pudding. It's not that bad. It's only like flu. Let's just kind of get herd immunity and we can move on. And then they realize actually what we're talking about is a very large number of vulnerable people being brought to death's door all at the same time. The National Health Service won't be able to look after them, and people will die unnecessarily. And at that point, they then change. They jump onto another horse, and they're having to gallop really fast to try and catch up with everybody else. I think that's what's happened. And listen, I'm not in government. I'm not the one who's had to make the decisions, and I'm speaking with hindsight. So, it's difficult, but you're asking me an honest, question. I'm giving you an honest answer. I suspect that's kind of why we are where we are.
I feel like Italy, in particular, is probably a country we could have looked to and seen those lessons. Could you explain to us sort of what the situations we're seeing across Europe? Italy and Spain, for example, very, very serious cases, high numbers of casualties, and Germany, whilst doing a lot of testing, there is the potential. I saw one remark today that there was actually the possibility of revolution from the German middle classes potentially if the financial impacts, the societal impacts after the virus are not dealt with properly.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the first thing to do is to begin with China. And I think that it's probably right that, there are regulations. I mean, things have been agreed with the World Health Organization about making sure that other countries are told if there is a virus or if there is a potential pandemic. And I think we have to begin with, we think probably the Chinese took too long to tell the rest of the world and to tell the rest of the world the whole story. So I think we were on the back foot as a world because of that. And in future, I think we need to look again at the early warning systems and making sure that we have something which is a bit more robust than what we've got at the moment. I think in Italy, although they're a country like us in terms of size, they also have like a number of centres of tourism where there will have been Chinese tourists going. So so the virus can be spread out automatically very early.
Fashion Week in Milan. Like Fashion Week in Milan.
Fashion Week in Milan, or just in Florence or Rome or Naples, or there are all of these wonderful cities, that the Chinese, all of us, really enjoy, and they're great world cities that everyone would want to go and see. So you can see how quite quickly it could spread. And also the population is relatively elderly, and we've heard that those who are relatively elderly are most vulnerable when it comes to this. So I suspect there's a kind of a whole range of reasons as to why it was that it spread as quickly as it did in Italy. And of course, we had to learn lessons from that. And, they're 2 weeks, 3 weeks ahead of us. And given that Italy was going through what it was, that's perhaps another great warning bell that the government perhaps should have listened to more than it did and acted faster. Again, I say that with a caveat of I know it's difficult and I know I'm speaking with hindsight, but an honest question deserves an honest answer.
Yes. So I was going to say that because obviously it's worth stating it's a time of emergency, it's a time of crisis, and it's very easy to make these judgments after the fact. But
right.
no doubt there has to be an inquest at the end of this.
I mean, the bottom and top of it is that we're a really interconnected world, much more than we ever have been. Unfortunately, this will not be the only virus that will spread across the world really quickly. So what we have to do, we have to obviously deal with the current situation, but we can't just let the world then spin on. We have to be then looking at, right, what lessons do we learn, and implement the lessons. Make sure that next time, because something could be even worse next time, something could be even worse. Some really scary diseases could pass across the world really quickly, and we have to have a means, an international response, an international coordinated response, learning from what worked best this time round, so that next time we are 2,000 times better prepared. In order to make sure that we know what to do. Because I mean, even Laura Kuenssberg keeps saying, we're making this up as we're going along, which is true.
So let's talk about China a little more then, because I suppose it's par for the course with China talking about people having disappeared, people who are critical of the government being taken care of, and there have been reports of senior doctors going missing who have been critical of the government, accusing them of a cover-up of the disease. To what extent do you think the data coming out of China is reliable about the scope that coronavirus has spread there?
I mean, I have no way of knowing. All I can say is that it is quite clear that the warning signs were not given to the rest of the world early enough. I mean, that's, self-evident. Whether the spread of the disease has been reported accurately, how widespread it is, we just don't know, do we? I mean, it's like in Britain, actually. We could be accused of the same thing. We don't even know. We don't know how widespread the disease is. I don't know if you've had it or if I've had it. We haven't had any symptoms, or the day we were feeling a bit peaky was actually the day when it passed over us. We just don't know. We just don't know, because we're not testing. The Chinese may not have been testing, but we're not testing either. They may have been not testing for different reasons, but, I mean, the effect is the same. We have no idea how extensive the disease is in Britain. Of course, the government is now hoping that it has this great hope. The great hope is going to be that they have this potential test, which is going to test whether or not we've had it. And they've got millions of these tests potentially available to be able to test people to see, so if I've had it and you've had it, we can go back to work, so there will be kind of two stratas of life, those that have had the disease and are okay, and those that haven't yet had it. Who knows? It does beg the question, of course, which is, if we can get our hands on 3.5 million or 4 million or however many of these tests that they have for people who've already had the disease, why on earth don't we have that sort of number of tests for people to find out if they actively have it at that time, particularly if they're working in the health service, or perhaps as important, and nobody ever talks about it, in social care, where if you're a social care worker, you will be dealing with the most vulnerable. You're going door to door, and you might have the disease, not even know that you have, and these people that you love and you care for, and you put everything into keeping them alive and keeping them healthy and keeping them looked after, you might be the person who brings the disease to them, which kills them. I mean, how can you live with that? And there isn't any of this protection equipment. There isn't any protection equipment, and there isn't any testing. I mean, it's dreadful.
So it's a valid point. Although I would say I think the days of Chris Whitty or Sir Patrick Vallance disappearing off to a prison camp probably not very likely here in the UK. It would be remiss of me not to ask you about your favourite politician, Emily, the President of the United States. He's striking a new tune on the virus now, isn't he? And would appear to taking it a little bit more seriously. News that one of his friends contracted the disease and his condition has deteriorated pretty quickly, and also as well, obviously, the grim scenes coming out of New York that I'm sure you've seen. Why has it taken the President of the United States so long to take this virus seriously?
Where do I start? I think that he's not somebody who is prepared to sit down and pay attention to the detail. So if someone was to give him a presentation as to what the disease means, what it is that needs to be done, and to go through all the data in relation to it, they won't be able to keep his attention. I think that he is an instinctive politician, and his instincts are self-preservation. Self-preservation means winning the next presidential election, which means keeping the economy going and for America to feel good about itself. And so the last thing he wants is a virus which is being spread around. He also has this deep sense of paranoia, doesn't he? Where he thinks that any criticism of the way that things are is somehow or other some sort of conspiracy between liberals and the media, making it up just to make his personal life more difficult. Never mind about all the people who might die. It's always about him. And I think that's what the problem has been. And I think that he has been shamed by responsible politicians, such as the mayor of New York, who is now really the spokesperson, I think, for the soul of America and for their concerns. And the way that his press conferences actually people pay more attention to than they do to the president of the United States is really interesting. And to a certain extent, people are zoning out of what Trump says, because he says one day, he says something extraordinary the next. And I think when people are feeling anxious and frightened, the last thing they want to hear is, the latest extraordinary and unsubstantiated statement of the President of the United States. And of course, in the end, I suppose, the job of the President of the United States is, of course, foreign policy, and of course they can make the decision about going to war or not. But the day-to-day job of the President of the United States, which is what Obama did so well, was to articulate how the Americans feel, and to continue to sort of talk their story, to be there to speak on their behalf, to express what they feel in a way that they haven't been able to express themselves. And the kind of the anger and the I've got to blame someone and it isn't my fault, it's someone else's sort of attitude of the President of the United States is really just I think just is very discordant when you can't blame anyone for a virus. He can't personalize it and say it's X. I mean, he's tried to blame Europe for it. He's tried to blame China for it. It's obviously nobody's fault. It's certainly not his fault. And so it goes on. Yes, I mean, completely inappropriate person, the worst, most inappropriate person to be leading the biggest country in the Western world at a time of this sort of crisis. It's absolutely tragic.
A theme, I've been having conversations with prominent politicians like yourself, and a theme that's come up is sort of the potential for coronavirus to change our societies for the better once the dust has settled. Andy Burnham yesterday mentioned that, if we can take care of the homeless in a time like this, why on earth can't we take care of them when everything's going to plan? A scene yesterday was the 70,000-ton US Navy ship Comfort pulling into New York, a 1,000-bed hospital there to take care of people. And I wonder if it perhaps might demonstrate to people the power of militaries, the potential for military forces to actually be used, as we mentioned already, actually, to be evacuating Britons from abroad, to be providing medical care to Americans in New York. Do you think that there is potential for us to realign on this sort of global scale, and that this kind of pandemic might give people a wake-up call and to start using their military forces perhaps for the better?
I think it's really interesting when it comes to peacekeeping. When the United Nations wants troops to go out and do peacekeeping, the West very often will put money in, but will never put forces in. And so it's for the developing world to provide the forces, and it's for the West to provide the money. And it's as if we don't want to take any risks with our military, even if it is, keeping the peace. And we have, large armies as countries, but the chances of the Russians rolling over the hills with tanks is not really necessarily very high. So to what extent will we be expecting our armed forces to be engaged in armed combat in the near future? So the traditional role, of course, has gone, and there are other roles. But I think that fortunately we have, it's not in such a healthy state as it ought to be because of 10 years of austerity, but we have a public sector which, when well financed and well funded and supported properly, can actually give support to our nation in a way that other countries, perhaps like America, don't have. So we are a country of a safety net. The trouble is that our safety net has great big holes in it at the moment. So hopefully we will repair those holes in order to get through this pandemic, and will keep the net properly maintained thereafter without the need to employ the military. But I hear what you say about, what role do we expect the military to have going into the future? And I certainly would hope that we would play a greater role in peacekeeping actively ourselves than we have been doing so far, because I'm afraid across the world there are many countries and many areas, many zones where there do need to be peacekeeping forces. And I think that us giving funding is one thing, but I think that we should take a bit more of a leadership role in relation to that as well.
Just finally, a word on America and Iran. Two countries obviously struggling to fight against coronavirus, but they may also be about to start fighting each other in Iraq. Is American escalation against, Iran-backed militias there probable, do you think, at this time of global crisis?
I think what's really interesting I've been following this with great care, and what has been said, and I think it is right, is that the hawks in America have been using the same playbook as the Americans used in the run-up to the war in Iraq, by demonizing Iran in the way that they have and slowly ramping up the tension. And the worry is that it might, that as things get more delicate, people don't quite often. It may be that there are people in America who just want to increase the tension and hope that by increasing the tension that the Iranians will back down. If they think that, they are gravely mistaken. And we could trip into a war without ever necessarily intending to. The Iranians will not back down, and that's not the way to engage them. The way to engage them is the way that I think one of the greatest achievements of international diplomacy over the last few decades has been the Iranian nuclear deal, which was a diplomatic achievement, which was just extraordinary. So it brought the Iranians back in from the cold by way of saying, stop developing your nuclear bomb and we will trade with you again and we will stop the sanctions. And they crept towards one another and they built up trust over time, and the deal came in. And then what happened? Donald Trump gets elected. And because it was Obama's deal, Donald Trump didn't like it. Donald Trump didn't like it, and he tore it up and said, no, I'm not having it. There are so many things the Iranians are doing which is wrong, which is true. But what you have to do in order to stop them doing that is not to threaten them, but to slowly bring them in. And that was the point of the Iranian nuclear deal. Of course, the behavior of the Iranians across the region, needs to be stopped. There are many things that need to be challenged, but there are ways of challenging it. And frankly, the effective way of challenging it is to bring Iran in, is for them to gain trust with the West and then to slowly work through the other issues. But that hasn't happened, and we are going backwards. And we got very close to a potential war a few months ago, but people seem to have walked away again. Donald Trump has this habit of doing these things. I mean, look what happened with North Korea. He walks into the argument of North Korea. He sort of shouts and yells. He sort of, makes nasty faces. He, slags off, and there's a mutual standoff, etc., etc. Everyone gets very frightened. He then walks away. What difference? What's happened? What's happened to North Korea? Have they stopped building bombs? No. Has anything happened? But the problem with Iran, what's happened, is that we walk close to war. Everything is very frightening. The hardliners in Iran go on then. And the hardliners in America saying, yeah, come on then. And they get closer and closer, then they back off. And what happens? The longer term effect in Iran is that the hardliners get into the ascendancy. Those who wanted to engage the West are undermined entirely by the behavior of Donald Trump. And so it tips the balance within Iran. The purpose of the Iranian nuclear deal was to give extra strength and oomph to the more liberal elements. So this is in Iranian terms, liberal, obviously, but, the more liberal elements within Iran, and to try to, to give extra strength and support. And unfortunately, Donald Trump's latest foray into foreign affairs in the Middle East, I'm afraid, has simply made the Iranian hardliners even stronger.
Grim times.
Sorry. News, mate.
So maybe some good news next time we speak, Emily Thornberry. Thank you very much for taking the time. I appreciate it.
I hope your dog's all right.